Now, on the Georgia vote, Kamala Harris, J.D. Vance, and Tim Walz all visited Metro Atlanta this week. We look at their messages and how some voters received them, with just 6 weeks to go in the race for the White House.
Plus, we sit down with State Senate Majority Leader Steve Gooch, find out what the powerful Republican is looking to push forward under the Gold Dome next session, and how he's involved in the fight for Georgia's 16 electoral votes.
And GOP strategist Jay Williams and Democratic consultant Amy Morton break down this week's hot political topics in our Roundtable.
All right now on the Georgia Vote.
From the 11 Alive studios, this is the Georgia Vote with Faith Jesse and Zach Merchant.
Good Sunday morning and welcome to the Georgia Vote. Well, this week, both presidential candidates had Georgia voters on their minds.
3 of the 4 people at the top of the Democratic and Republican tickets crisscrossed our state and made campaign stops right here in Metro Atlanta. Most recently, Vice President Kamala Harris visited Atlanta Friday. It was her second visit here since President Joe Biden dropped out in July, and her first since this month began. Her campaign focused this trip, reproductive rights.
It is a fight for the future, and it is a fight for freedom. For freedom. And we know in America, freedom is not to be given. It is not to be bestowed. It is ours by right. It is ours by right. And that includes the fundamental freedom of a woman to be able to make decisions about her own body and not have her government telling her what to do. This is not a partisan issue. This is not a partisan issue. And it is proving that the voice of the people has been heard and will be heard again. And will be heard again.
And that is not all. The 2 running mates each took time to mingle with Georgia voters. Earlier in the week, Republican Senator J.D. Vance was the guest of the Faith and Freedom Coalition at the Cobb Galleria Center. He criticized the policies of the Biden administration and reminded the audience of Donald Trump's role in the Supreme Court's 2022 decision, which ended the constitutional right to an abortion.
It's especially scary when a pregnancy is unplanned, but we are going to support mothers and children. We're going to do new investments in counseling, in job training, and help with newborn expenses. We're going to do new investments in education and pregnancy care centers and so much more because we believe that this country must be more welcoming to families.
Less than 24 hours after Vance's visit, Democratic VP nominee Minnesota Governor Tim Walz stopped in Atlanta and Macon. Walz attempted to pitch himself and the vice president as more in touch with the middle class compared to the Republican ticket.
The contrast is that we see a proposal from Donald Trump to put a 20% national sales tax basically on everything, adding about $4,000. Not a single economist thinks it's a good idea. So I think telling them that, look, we're with this, folks understand that they're hurting on this, but there's a plan to go forward, and Vice President Harris has got that.
And we still have a little more than 6 weeks to Election Day, meaning more visits from candidates are likely. And that's the importance of Georgia's 16 electoral votes.
With just weeks to go before voters head to the polls, the state election board continues to advance changes to Georgia's election rules. At a meeting Friday, the board voted 3-2 to approve a new rule that would require poll workers to hand count ballots cast in the upcoming election. Opponents say the move could delay election results and add confusion to the certification process. Janelle King, one of the 3 Republican-appointed board members who supports the move, says the new rule will boost accuracy.
So I think that what we're doing is creating more stability in our election process. We're also putting our county board members in position to certify with confidence, since that's the big concern.
Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, a Republican himself, has repeatedly pushed back against the board's recent moves. We asked him earlier this week about it at an event inside the DeKalb County Elections Office. You've been critical of some of these changes. Why is that?
Last minute changes because already, right now, 2 doors over here, they're doing the poll worker training for DeKalb County. Some of the counties have already gone through all their poll worker training. When you start changing what those procedures would be, then you'd have to come back and do additional training. So that just adds an element of risk because they're not as trained as long and as many times, and repetitive training is a good thing.
This controversy far from settled. Court challenges to the recent state election board moves are expected.
And in a little more than a week, this state and the nation, they will take time to celebrate a first of its kind moment. A former president of the United States turning 100 years old. The nation's 39th president and Georgia native Jimmy Carter will mark the day from his home in Plains. And this past Tuesday, Atlanta's Fox Theater hosted celebrities, musicians, close friends, and 5 generations of Carters to salute the former president. The program, titled Jimmy Carter 100, a celebration and song, included all types of music from gospel to a little rock and roll. Money raised from this event is going to support the Carter Center. And next Sunday, we sit down with former State Senator Jason Carter about his grandfather's legacy and his milestone birthday.
The next Georgia legislative session, it's getting closer. After the break, we sit down with the state Senate Majority Leader, Senator Steve Gooch. We ask about his priorities and discuss how lawmakers might respond to the Appalachia High School shooting.
And later, our Voice of the Voter is all about a good song. Find out how this musician stays in tune leading up to the election. Welcome back. State Senator Steve Gooch leads the Republican Majority Caucus in the Georgia Senate.
He joined us for this week's Sunday Conversation just a few months ahead of the start of the next legislative session. The new legislative session starts in January. You're the Senate Majority Leader. What are your biggest priorities in terms of getting new legislation passed in this next session?
We're going to try to lower the income tax again next year. We've lowered it 3 times now in the last 3 years. Governor Kemp has led the way on that direction, and I think it's been good because it's allowing Georgians to keep their money in their pockets and not in the government's pockets. We've had record surpluses for the last 4 or 5 years in our state budgets, and we've returned a lot of that money to the taxpayers. $1.5 billion of that went back to the Georgia taxpayers this year. Plus, we took an additional $1.5 billion out of the surplus, moved it over to the Department of Transportation to try to fast track some much needed road improvements to help with a lot of the congestion due to the heavy growth that we've seen here in Georgia. So there'll be some more of those kinds of bills coming up. We'll continue to look at how to keep our children safe. Public safety in the schools is going to be a really top priority for the Senate this coming session.
As you know, a gunman killed 4 people at Appalachia High School, injured 9 others. As the Senate Majority Leader, what are you going to do in the next legislative session to keep Georgia's kids safe?
Well, this past session, Zach, we put $100+ million into the state budget that goes directly to each school system in Georgia. And that $100 million was an additional monies that was added to what we already had the budget the previous year. And so that allows the school boards to be able to put that money into locking down the front doors and the back doors of the school to make sure that parents are registered when they come into the high schools or the middle schools to pick up their children. But it also allows the SROs, with the school resource officers that work in each of the schools, to have the necessary equipment, whether that's panic buttons or other safety devices, to where a teacher that's in stress or a teacher that's in need, maybe the teacher recognizes a kid's behavior is a little unusual that day, they can hit that button and get immediate response from the front office and from law enforcement. So we'll continue to look at ways to improve those safety measures.
Everything you just laid out focused on hardening the school facilities themselves. Do you think the Senate also needs to be thinking about gun control legislation to help keep these schools safe?
You'll always have members of the Senate and the House talk about gun control, and that means something different to every citizen and every elected official in the state. Gun control can work in some states politically, but I don't think it'll work in Georgia politically.
Why is that?
Just because of the conservative nature of our citizenry. If you look at the Bill of Rights in our founding documents of this country, those rights are given to us to be protected, to protect our First Amendment rights, our Second Amendment rights. You can go down the list. And so we're very careful to protect the citizens' rights based on those founding documents. And so when you start whittling away at those founding documents and those Bill of Rights, then you get into a totally different argument. We believe protecting people's right to carry firearms should be a responsibility of the citizen, and that citizen should take the responsibility to make sure that that gun is put where it needs to belong, and it's not in the way of their children, and not to get in harm's way of anyone else.
Another big issue we hear about from a lot of voters that they're paying attention to is abortion. Georgia has, in effect, what's commonly known as the heartbeat bill. It bans most abortions after a fetal heartbeat is detected. That's usually around 6 weeks of pregnancy. Do you think the legislature needs to re-examine that? Is that too restrictive for 2024?
I don't think so, Zach. I tell you, we've had a lot of debate on that issue over the last 15 years, and I think the people in Georgia are very conservative. They're pro-family, they're pro-life. They want personal responsibility. They don't want the government taking care of every one of their needs. I believe that the exceptions that we had in the heartbeat bill takes care of most of the situations that most of the constituents I talk to are concerned about.
Conservatism, one of the core tenets of it is the idea that government shouldn't be making decisions for people who can act as responsible individuals. But this heartbeat bill restricts folks' ability to make an individual decision that some people say is a core element of their personal health. How do you reconcile that?
The way I see it as a Christian is that I'm the voice of those who can't speak for themselves. We value life, and we believe life begins at conception. And so that baby inside that womb can't speak for itself. And so we, as elected officials in a republic form of government, are sent to Atlanta to make decisions on behalf of our constituents. And I consider that unborn baby one of my constituents.
Senator Gooch said he is a strong supporter of former President Trump in the upcoming election, and he emphasized the importance of get-out-the-vote efforts over the next 6 weeks. When asked how close he thinks this presidential election could be, he said it might be razor thin. Well, the voice of the voter straight ahead, but next, our roundtable with GOP strategist Jay Williams and Democratic consultant Amy Morton. You're watching The Georgia Vote.
Time now for our Politics Roundtable. Today we have Amy Morton, the Chief Executive Officer for Southern Majority. She's consulted for prominent Democrats in the state, including State Senator Jen Jordan and Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. And Republican strategist Jay Williams is the founder and managing principal of the Stone Ridge Group. Some of the clients he's directly worked for include former Georgia Governor Nathan Deal and former presidential candidate Nikki Haley, both returning panelists. Welcome to panel.
Thank you.
Welcome in. I want to start with this. We're 6 weeks out from the election, and we hear so much about the undecided voters. But if you live in this world, you probably haven't met a lot of these people, because it feels like so many folks have made up their minds now. Who are the undecided voters that are still left out there, and what are their biggest issues? Amy, let's start with you.
Well, if you looked at the AJC poll that came out last week, one of the groups that polling pointed to was 15% of African American voters who said they were undecided. Now, I'm not sure that, I don't know how accurate the polling is, but I think that if that is accurate, then that's actually a huge opportunity for Kamala Harris. I think that that's a very good place for her to be looking for votes, and I think it will benefit her as we move forward to November.
Jay, how do you see it?
Look, I mean, I think that there's maybe some undecided voters out there, but I think the biggest thing is making sure that, you know, both sides turn out their people that are committed. I don't think there's probably enough undecided voters to sway the election one way or the other. Maybe within their own party, that they've just got to get them excited about the election, but I don't know that they're undecided per se, just maybe not as excited about their candidate.
And it's interesting, Amy, that you bring up that AJC poll, because it also showed that just 86% of Democrats, 77% of black voters in Georgia are on board with Harris, while 90% of Republicans. So she still kind of has an uphill battle. I want to ask you both about the topic of abortion. We saw J.D. Vance in town this week. That was a big center of their conversation over at Faith and Freedom. We also saw Vice President Harris come down after that ProPublica report detailing 2 Georgia women who died preventable deaths from what they're saying is tied to the heartbeat bill. How important will abortion be in Georgia? We know economy is top of mind, but how important is abortion? Amy, we'll start with you.
Well, I think you pointed to the ProPublica piece. I think that we have identified at least 2 women in Georgia who have died as a result of Georgia's restrictive abortion laws, which is why Vice President Harris came back to Georgia and to talk about that. So for female voters in particular that we see in our polling, it is a very important issue, but it is not an issue that trumps the economy. For voters across the spectrum, the economy is top of mind.
And Jay, guns also a big issue here. We saw the vice president go on Oprah saying, if somebody breaks into my house, I will shoot them, right? Could she be talking a little bit too much to get away from her base, going a little bit too far to the right here, Jay?
I mean, I think she probably has to tack right a little bit on some issues, at least seem, amenable to some, moderate or slightly conservative viewpoints, because the fact of the matter is she needs North Carolina and Georgia to potentially win if she doesn't get Pennsylvania. So that's where she needs to go, and she's not going to win being a hardcore progressive.
You talk about the path to victory, and this is the part of the year where that electoral math really starts to boil down. Jay, what's the road to victory right now for the Trump campaign? What's the road to victory for the Harris campaign? What are we going to see over these next 6 weeks?
Look, I think you're going to see them a lot in Georgia. I think they're going to be a lot in North Carolina. I think they're going to be a lot in Pennsylvania. There's some other states, Michigan, Arizona, whatever. But she's got to win Pennsylvania, and if she doesn't win Pennsylvania, she's got to have North Carolina or Georgia. I don't think she's going to win Georgia, so North Carolina is the next stop. I think it's very tight there. You had the situation with the lieutenant governor, or who's running for governor there. That may motivate Dems there or suppress Republicans, but I think her best opportunities in Pennsylvania. I think that's where it's at, in my opinion.
Amy?
I think that Georgia surprised the whole country in 2020, and that it very well could go Dem again. And let's remember, it wasn't just the presidential race, but also the Senate races that Georgia captured in that. So Jay is right. This is all about turnout. I think Democrats are very good at turning out voters, and they have a very, very good operation. I'm very impressed with the campaign that Harris is running, and I'm optimistic about results on November 5th.
If we could ask you one thing, we have to talk about are the results, the vote from the election board, hand counting ballots. Obviously, those who are in support saying this is what we need to do to ensure that our votes are being counted. But on the other side, I see you shaking your head there, Amy. People are saying this is going to delay the process. I want to ask you guys this. We have 1 minute. Some people are saying, why fix what's not broken? You had 3 recounts. They all came out to say that. Amy, what do you speak to that? And then Jay, we want to hear from you.
I think that the new rule passed by the Board of Elections is not based in law, and that it actually opens the process to more fraud, and I hope will be challenged quickly in court.
30 seconds, Jay.
I think we're making a mistake by changing a bunch of rules right before the election. I just don't think it's wise. I think we're opening ourselves up to potential problems that we're not foreseeing. I do believe that Republicans put in place a lot of election measures the last session or the session before that, and I think that those are sufficient.
Jay, we have 10 seconds left. Quickly, a lot of Republicans are pushing for this state election board change. You see it differently. Is this a rift within the party?
I don't think it's a rift. It's just my personal opinion. I just don't like to monkey with it a month out. It potentially cause a lot of problems.
One of the many nuanced elements of Georgia politics. We'll be talking about it for the rest of the election season, and we're going to be talking about it after the break. Our voice of the voter is strumming on a 6 string this week. He'll share what's guiding his vote this November. Up next. As Election Day gets closer, the amount of competition for your attention goes up. More ads, more fundraising, more noise. But everyday Georgians, as always, remain at the heart of this contest. After all, you can't have the Georgia vote without Georgia voters. This week's Voice of the Voter is Parker Smith, an Atlanta native who started his own business teaching music in DeKalb County's Kirkwood neighborhood.
Music, it's a way to express yourself. We teach students of all levels from 5 to 85, and it's different with each age group.
Do you think you could show me a little bit of what a lesson looks like?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can do that. So we'll keep it super basic.
Great, please. You set your expectations and then lower them substantially for me. I'll do my best.
So we're going to take our first finger to the 2nd fret of the 5th string. There you go. Cool.
There, yeah.
So you made a good adjustment there. You're kind of getting this part of your hand out of the way so that string could ring. So a lot of it is just getting the right, hand position. It's hard to pick up something new as an adult. It's hard to not be good at something immediately when we're used to excelling in our jobs and other things that we've worked so hard at. So.
But is it worthwhile to get into that beginner mindset?
Absolutely. It's humbling and it's good for you and you surprise yourself.
Are you ever too old to learn?
I don't think so. No.
You've got a big election coming up in November. When you look ahead to it, what worries you the most?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think the thing that worries me the most is no matter what the outcome is, hopefully people don't resort to violence, So I think just realizing that whoever wins, we're all on the same team together and hopefully there's not a bad outcome,
What's the biggest issue that's going to govern how you vote in November?
Safety. I think that's, as a music teacher and, as a teacher and a new parent, I think safety is the biggest thing that we're looking for. And
if you had to pick a second most important issue, what do you think it would be?
The economy, for sure. And I think, again, as musicians and teachers, a lot of us are struggling to pay the bills. And I know a lot of teachers are getting priced out of neighborhoods that they want to live in or having trouble buying groceries. And
you've been really kind to share your space and your time and your thoughts with us. We always end on this. What are you optimistic about?
I'm optimistic about the kids that we interact with. They have, for better or worse, they've been had to deal with a lot of more serious issues, and I feel like they're being more proactive. They're being more empathetic, and stuff that I didn't have to deal with, as a kid growing up. So, hopefully they can lead the way, and we can help kind of guide them into the future.
'Cause it's gonna be raining outdoors.
You might have noticed he plays a little better than I did there. Parker's shop, Guitar Shed, it is at the same location since it started nearly a decade ago. He says he began all on his own. Since then, he's grown to have a staff of about 30 other teachers and musicians. He estimates he's had more than 1,000 students come through over the years.
Zach, I'm impressed by your playing skills.
Thank you. That one chord really took me a long way there. I'm a slow learner, but I'll get there. Well, we appreciate you being here this weekend with us.
Thank you so much. We hope to see you back here next Sunday for another edition of the Georgia Vote and maybe some more of Zach's playing. We'll see.
Maybe. We'll see you next week.